If someone had told me a stranger would cross the room like a verdict, I'd have stared at the floor. It was the kind of misstep that takes 5 seconds to make and can unravel 5 years of hard-won calm. Nora Quinn knew that, had always known it. But there she was, swallowed by the crush inside the astral crown. With Damien, her ex-turned relentless mistake, closing in like a stormfront, panic snapped a choice into place. "I'm engaged," she said, flat as a blade, lifting her bare left hand as if the absence of a ring could pass for proof. Damien's eyebrow climbed, his smirk easy, amused, like he could smell the fear sweating through her composure. "Oh, really?" His voice carried a lazy contempt. "To who?" Nora's thoughts sprinted in circles. The room pressed tighter. Bass throbbed through the floorboards. Bodies jostled. Light fractured across glass and sweat and strangers. She kept her face smooth, breathing through the clamp of dread, willing a name, any name, to arrive before everything she'd rebuilt slipped again through her fingers. No way out. And then, as if summoned by fate, chaos, or sheer cruel irony, a voice behind her answered with lethal calm. "Me." The voice was female, cold, certain, dangerous. Nora turned around slowly, heart hammering so loud it overpowered the bass of the music. And there she was, dark suit, crimson lipstick, black silk shirt, unbuttoned just enough to be suggestive without being obvious. The kind of woman who walked like she owned the planet, and probably did. Everyone in Easton City knew who she was, even people who pretended not to. Vivian Cross, CEO of Cross International, billionaire, untouchable, rumored heartbreaker, publicly private, openly gay, unapologetically ruthless. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10. What score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. And somehow, inexplicably, standing there with one hand, sliding possessively onto the small of Nora's back like she belonged there. Nora blinked. She forgot how to breathe. Vivian didn't. She leaned in, voice low and lethal, but her mouth curved into the most dangerous smirk Nora had ever seen. "Play along," she whispered, warm breath ghosting against her ear. "Or I'll let him take you." Nora didn't hesitate. She curled an arm around Vivian's waist and laughed like she meant it, tilting her head in mock affection. "Sweetheart," she purred. "You're late." Vivian's fingers pressed tighter against her spine in approval. Damien looked stunned, then annoyed, then outright pissed. "You're engaged to her," he demanded. "Since when?" "Since none of your business," Vivian said, all silk and steel. She turned to Nora. "Ready to go?" Nora nodded, too stunned to think clearly. And just like that, Vivian took her hand, laced their fingers, and walked them both away from the crowd, from Damien confusion, from Nora's rapidly imploding night. They didn't speak until they were in the elevator, and even then, the silence was electric. Nora's heart hadn't calmed. Her palm still burned where Vivian had touched it. Finally, Nora turned. "Why did you do that?" Vivian didn't look at her. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight. "You looked like you needed saving." "I did." But Nora frowned. "Why you?" Vivian turned then, gaze sharp as glass. "Because I hate men who corner women like prey. And because I happen to be there. Next time lie better." Nora crossed her arms. "There won't be a next time." Vivian arched a brow. "Good, because Easton City thinks you're engaged to me now." Nora laughed, half nervous. "Nobody believes gossip in this town." Vivian's expression didn't change, except when it comes from me. "I own the building. I own the PR firm that just got the footage. I own the tabloids they'll send it to. If I don't deny it, the whole world will believe it." The elevator doors opened. Vivian stepped out, then looked back. "I suggest you come with me before it hits the news." Nora stood frozen. Everything in her life had just changed in 3 minutes. And yet somehow she followed, because somewhere deep down past the panic and adrenaline, there was one undeniable truth pulsing like a war drum beneath her skin. She wanted to know what it felt like to belong to Vivian Cross, even if it started as a lie, even if it ended with her heart in ruins. Nora sat on the leather couch, hands curled into fists in her lap, as Easton City's skyline glittered like 1,000 knowing eyes beyond the wall of glass behind her. She wasn't sure what was more surreal, the fact that she was inside Vivian Cross's penthouse, or that the woman herself was pouring her a glass of whiskey, like this was the most normal Tuesday night in the world. "You didn't have to bring me here," Nora said finally, voice tight. "I could have just gone home." Vivian glanced over her shoulder, one brow raised, and walked into a headline storm alone. She walked toward her, heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and handed her the glass. "You're trending." Nora blinked. "Excuse me." Vivian sat across from her, legs crossed, perfectly composed in that way that made Nora feel messy by comparison. "Someone recorded it. Us. The ringless engagement. Your ex's face. My hand on your back. The almost kiss." He crawled up Nora's neck. "That wasn't a kiss." "No," Vivian said, maddeningly calm as she sipped her drink. "But it looked like one." She lifted the remote and the massive flat screen flickered on. There Nora was wide-eyed, lips parted, tucked against Vivian's side like something precious. The clip looped, carving the implication deeper each time. "Jesus," Nora breathed. "They really believe it." "They'll believe everything if I don't deny it," Vivian said again. "And I don't plan to." Nora snapped her gaze to her. "Why?" "Because it benefits me, too." "How?" Nora asked, half defensive, half genuinely curious. Vivian rose and drifted to the windows, Easton City glittering below like a private kingdom. "My board wants a more relatable image. Less ice, more human. Engaged is perfect. Romance rounds the edges. So I'm your emotional support peasant," Nora muttered. Vivian's mouth tilted. "You're funny." "I'm serious. So am I. This helps me," Vivian said, turning back. "And whether you like it or not, it shields you for now." "This isn't sustainable," Nora said, standing. "No," Vivian agreed. "But it's useful. And if we play it right, we both get what we need." "What I need is to disappear," Nora snapped. "This isn't my world. I'm a graphic designer with a studio walk-up, a leaky ceiling, and no hot water half the time. I don't belong here." Vivian crossed the room unhurriedly, each step measured. "You belonged the second you looked at me." Nora's breath hitched. "That's not fair." "What's not fair?" Vivian murmured, now inches away, voice lowered. "Is the way you looked at me like you let me ruin you before you even knew my name." Nora wanted to deny it, to bolt, but her body stayed, caught in the heat of Vivian's nearness, and the fire in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, barely audible. Vivian brushed a strand of hair behind Nora's ear. "Because you interest me. You don't know me. Not yet." Nora's heart thudded hard enough to hurt. "And if I say no? Then you can walk out and let the media chew on you questions, threats, speculation," Vivian said evenly. "Or you can stay, just for now. Stay and pretend to be your fiancé. Stay and be safe. Stay and see what this could be." "This was supposed to be a lie," Nora whispered, overwhelmed. "Sometimes lies point to what we've been afraid to want," Vivian said, softer. Silence stretched. Nora didn't move. Finally, she let out a shaking breath. "Fine," she said. "I'll play along, but only until this dies down." Vivian smiled slowly, predatorily. "Of course." Nora wasn't sure which part was scarier, the lie itself, or how much she already hated the idea of it ending. Nora woke up to the soft vibration of her phone on the nightstand. For a brief second, disoriented and warm under the silken sheets, she forgot where she was. Then her eyes landed on the floor-to-ceiling windows, on the view of the skyline. To perfect, to high, to powerful. Vivian Cross's penthouse. Last night, the lie, the deal. She sat up with a jolt, running a hand through her tangled hair. only to find a neatly folded set of clothes resting on the chaise near the bed. A soft cream blouse, perfectly tailored black slacks. There was even a delicate pair of earrings and heels that looked suspiciously close to her size. There was a note resting on top of the blouse. "Wear this. We're having lunch with my board." Nora stared at it. For a full 10 seconds, her brain stalled. Then she whispered, "What the actual hell?" 15 minutes later, dressed in someone else's elegance, she stood in front of the mirror in Vivian's guest bedroom, staring at her reflection like it might offer an exit plan. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a news headline. Billionaire CEO Vivian Cross announces surprise engagement. Fiancé identified as designer Nora Quinn. Her stomach dropped. They named her full name, full photo, tagged her barely active Instagram. Her inbox was exploding. Comments, DMs, follow requests. She barely had time to process it before Vivian's voice came from the doorway. "You clean up well." Nora turned sharply. Vivian leaned against the frame, a fresh coffee in one hand, an amused glint in her eyes. Today she wore slate gray trousers and a soft ivory blouse tucked in, like she'd stepped out of a luxury campaign. Her hair was up, her lips red. Nora's throat went dry. "You told them my name. They would have found it eventually," Vivian replied, walking into the room. "Better to control the narrative. You posted it on your own account." Vivian's mouth curved. "I did. Why?" "Because people would assume worse if I didn't. They'd think you were a paid actress, or that I was hiding something." "You are hiding something. The truth." Vivian stopped in front of her. "Not everything is about truth, Nora. It's about perception. And right now, the world perceives us as in love. And you're fine with that." Nora snapped, walking around holding hands with a stranger. "I don't think you're a stranger anymore." Vivian's voice was softer now, quieter. "Not after last night." Nora hated how her pulse reacted, how her body leaned forward just slightly, like gravity recognized Vivian before she did. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Vivian met her gaze head in. "I want you to come to lunch. Sit beside me. Smile. Tell my board how we met. Touch my hand when you laugh. You want me to perform. I want you to be convincing. And what do I get?" Vivian hesitated, then handed her the coffee. "For starters, a raise." Nora blinked. "You don't even know where I work. You freelance, underpaid, overworked, and one viral video away from becoming a meme. I did my research. Jesus, you deserve better. I can give it to you, but I need you to play the part just for today." Nora sipped the coffee, grateful and furious. "You're terrifying. You know that." Vivian's smile was unapologetic. "That's why they believe I own you." Nora's spine stiffened. "You don't. Not yet." The words hung there, heavy and uninvited. Nora walked past her, brushing against her shoulder a second too long. "Let's get this over with." The boardroom on the top floor of Cross International was a sleek, intimidating temple of power. 12 directors, glass walls, enough money in one room to fund a small country. Vivian entered first, cool and composed, and everyone rose. Nora followed, heels silent on polished stone, heart pounding in her throat. Vivian pulled out a chair for her. Nora sat. Cameras flashed. Someone from PR introduced her. Nora smiled on cue, forced and poised until the words felt foreign in her mouth. "So Nora," one of the board members said, an older woman with sharp eyes and sharper jewelry. "How did you and Vivian meet?" Nora opened her mouth, paused, then glanced sideways. Vivian nodded once. "Still permission. Trust." "We met at a bar," Nora began. "It wasn't romantic. Not at first. I was dealing with a situation and she stepped in Kivalis." The woman said, amused. "Very. She pretended to be my fiancé." Chuckles around the table. "And when did pretending stop?" Nora hesitated again. Her hands under the table curled into fists. She looked at Vivian, expecting cold calculation. But what she found instead was something terrifyingly close to pride. So Nora answered without breaking eye contact. It hasn't. Silence, then laughter. Someone clapped. Vivian reached under the table and touched her knee. It was brief. Electric. Nora nearly jumped. After the meeting, as they walked back to the elevator, Nora couldn't hold it in. You liked that, didn't you? Vivian's expression didn't change. You were brilliant. I was lying. You told a better story than I could have. Nora stared at her, breath catching. You're enjoying this too much. Are you not? Nora didn't answer. She stepped into the elevator. Vivian followed. The doors closed. The silence crackled. Nora turned to face her. You keep touching me. You don't stop me. Maybe I should. Vivian stepped closer. Then do it. Nora's breath hitched. Their faces were inches apart now. The tension stretched between them like a string pulled too tight. One more lie. One more glance. One more second. And they might actually break the one rule they never said out loud. Don't make this real. The elevator chimed. The spell shattered. Vivian stepped back. Dinner tonight, she said simply. You'll need something nicer to wear. I'll have something delivered. And then she was gone, leaving Nora alone with a racing heart and this sinking suspicion that whatever this was, it wasn't just a lie anymore. Nora hadn't expected the dress to fit perfectly. She hadn't expected the box to arrive less than an hour after Vivian left. She definitely hadn't expected it to be custom, tailored to her measurements with a handwritten card that simply said, "Wear this tonight." No arguments. It was a sleek black slip dress, the kind that hugged curves and whispered sin. She stared at it for 10 minutes before daring to touch it. And when she finally slipped it on, when she saw herself in the mirror, neck bare, shoulders soft, the fabric like a second skin, her first thought was, she's trying to kill me. Her second, I kind of want her. 2. The car arrived at precisely 7. Sleek, black, silent. A driver in a crisp suit opened the door with a small nod. Nora climbed in, palms sweating, heart racing. She hadn't spoken to Vivian all day, hadn't texted or called, hadn't replied to the photo the woman had sent earlier, a preview of the rooftop restaurant they were apparently attending. The caption had said, "Bring your appetite." Nora wasn't sure if it referred to the food or something else entirely. When she arrived, Vivian was already waiting. And God help her, she looked devastating. Midnight blue silk, hair in waves, diamond earrings that sparkled like they were flirting with the moon. But it was her eyes, dark, unreadable, focused entirely on Nora, that made her knees feel like water. You clean up dangerously well, Vivian said as she offered her hand. Nora took it. Her skin was warm. You keep saying that. Should I be worried? Vivian's lips curled into something between a smile and a warning. Only if you plan to keep pretending you don't enjoy this. They were seated on a private terrace lit by strings of soft gold light and candles that flickered with every breeze. The table was set for 2, but Nora felt like the entire city was watching them from below. We're really doing this, she murmured, looking around. Vivian poured them both wine. We have to. Half my board is watching from that table over there. Nora froze, then looked where Vivian had nodded discreetly. Sure enough, 3 impeccably dressed people were seated just far enough to be polite, but close enough to see everything. So, this is still part of the game. This is the spotlight. Nora, smile. I'm not a performer. You're doing just fine. Nora sipped her wine, trying not to think about how exposed she felt. She hadn't signed up for this. Public appearances, expensive clothes, being looked at like she belonged in Vivian's world. And yet, when Vivian reached across the table and took her hand, Nora didn't pull away. Her thumb brushed gently over Nora's skin. A calculated move, a display. But it didn't feel fake. It felt like heat blooming under the surface of something carefully contained. Why me? Nora asked suddenly, voice low. You could have picked anyone to fake this with. Someone from your world. Someone who knows how to play along without freaking out. Vivian looked at her for a long time. Then quietly, because you didn't try to impress me. You weren't afraid to challenge me. And when I touched you, you didn't flinch. You burned. Nora swallowed. You don't know me. I want to. The answer came fast. Too fast. And it caught both of them off guard. For a second, something unguarded flickered in Vivian's eyes. Vulnerability. No. Nora couldn't trust that. Not yet. This is dangerous. Nora whispered. Only if you keep pretending you're immune to me. Vivian leaned in slightly. Are you? Nora looked away, but her fingers tightened around Vivian's. What happens if I stop pretending? Vivian smiled slowly, as if savoring the question. Then things get interesting. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Exquisite food, soft laughter, touches that lingered too long. And yet, the moment that burned itself into Nora's memory came later when they were in the elevator again, rising toward Vivian's penthouse. They stood side by side, close but not touching, tension thick between them. Just before the doors slid open, Vivian said softly, "You don't have to go back to the guest room tonight." Nora turned. What? Stay in my room, a beat. No expectations. Just stay. She should have said no, should have reminded Vivian this was a business arrangement. If a Wade, a necessary evil. Instead, she heard herself say, "Okay." The penthouse was hushed when they stepped inside. Vivian didn't veer toward the guest suite. She led Nora into a bedroom that looked like a magazine spread warm lamplight. Deep hues. Silk and velvet everywhere. "You can take the left," Vivian said, already unclasping her earrings in the mirror. Nora stood there, rooted. "Do you do this often? Invite fake fiancés to share your bed?" Vivian's mouth tipped. "First time." Nora laughed, a little too breathless. "Is this part of the image?" "No," Vivian said without turning. "This part is just for me." Nora's pulse hammered. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately. When she reached Vivian, she slid the earrings from her fingers and set them on the dresser. Their eyes met in the mirror. "I don't know what I'm doing," Nora whispered. Vivian turned fully. "Then let me show you." Their mouths didn't meet, not yet, but the air narrowed, charged. Nora stepped back before the edge gave way. "Good night," she managed, voice unsteady. She climbed into the bed, Vivian's bed, and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly the lie stopped being a lie. She didn't sleep. Not really. She stayed on the left, like instructed, wrapped in soft sheets that smelled faintly of expensive perfume and something sharper, more intimate, Vivian's scent. The quiet stretched tight as wire, humming with everything neither dared to say. Vivian hadn't touched her once, not when the lights went out, not when Nora turned restlessly. She kept her distance physically. Emotionally, it was another story. Even with 3 feet between them, Nora felt her like heat along her spine. Near dawn, Nora slipped from the bed and padded barefoot through the penthouse, trying not to think about how absurd her life had become. She stopped at the glass wall over Easton City, arms folded, heart a thunderstorm. Lights blinked below like scattered stars. The skyline seemed endless. She felt small, so small. Soft footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "No," Vivian said, quiet. Silence gathered. "You always run when things get too close." Nora closed her eyes. "You always push people just to see if they'll break." Vivian didn't answer. She stepped up beside her, both of them staring into the night. "I didn't plan this," Nora whispered. "I didn't ask to be part of your game. It stopped being a game the second you stopped flinching when I touched you." "That's not fair, isn't it?" Nora turned to face her. Easton City lights painted golden lines across Vivian's face, softening the sharpness, making her look almost human, almost breakable. Nora didn't trust it. "You're used to getting what you want." "Usually," Vivian admitted. "And now," Nora asked, "do you want me?" Vivian's eyes locked onto hers. "Do you want the truth?" "Try me." Vivian stepped closer. "I want you the moment you challenged me in that elevator. I wanted you when you laughed at me in my own penthouse. I wanted you the second you walked into that boardroom and lied like your life depended on it. So, I'm just another conquest. No, Vivian said, voice low. You're the one who makes me want to stop conquering. Nora's breath caught. She hated how fast her heart responded. You're dangerous. Only to the ones who matter. The silence between them crackled. Then Nora said, I don't know if this is real. It doesn't have to be real, Vivian said, her voice like velvet and smoke. It just has to be undeniable. And then she kissed her. There was no hesitation, no pretense, just heat. Vivian's hand slid into Nora's hair, pulling her forward. And Nora let herself fall into it, into the hunger, the tension, the fire that had been building from the first moment their eyes met. Nora's hands found Vivian's waist, then her back, pulling her closer, closer, until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, wild and urgent and somehow still terrifyingly gentle. And it shattered something inside Nora because it didn't feel like pretending, not even for a second. When they finally broke apart, Nora was breathless, lips tingling, heart a riot in her chest. Vivian rested her forehead against hers. I wasn't going to do that, she murmured. Why did you? Because I wanted to know if I was the only one losing control. Nora didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her kiss had spoken for her. Vivian pulled back, eyes searching her face. We have a gala tomorrow night, she said softly. My company's biggest annual event. Every investor, partner, and press outlet will be there. And they all expect to meet your fiancé. Exactly. Nora nodded slowly. I'll be ready. Vivian hesitated. After tonight, are you sure? No, Nora said honestly. But I'm going anyway. She turned and walked back toward the bedroom, pulse still racing, knees still weak. And this time, when she slid into bed, she didn't stay on her side. Vivian joined her a minute later, silent and warm, and neither of them spoke as they fell asleep. But when the sun rose the next morning, the space between them was gone. Nora had never been to a gala. She'd certainly never worn a dress that came with its own security detail. The gown arrived at noon, delivered by a personal assistant who introduced herself as Sloane and spoke with a crisp efficiency of someone who managed world leaders in her free time. Miss Cross selected this herself, Sloane said as she unzipped the garment bag. It's custom Dior, one of one. Nora stared at the shimmering ocean of midnight blue fabric. Her voice stuck somewhere between awe and panic. Right? Sloane gave her a once-over. Hair and makeup arrive in 1 hour. Then she left. Just like that. Nora exhaled sharply and stared at the dress like it might bite. That night when the car pulled up to the gala, Nora stepped out like someone she barely recognized. Her hair was swept into a soft twist at the nape of her neck, strands framing her face. Diamond earrings sparkled at her ears, tasteful but unmistakably real. The dress clung to her like shadow and moonlight. And when Vivian emerged from the other side of the car in a black tuxedo with a silk lapel, and her signature crimson lips, Nora forgot how to breathe. Vivian's eyes traveled the length of her slowly, deliberately. You look, she said, stepping closer like sin wrapped in starlight. Nora rolled her eyes half smiling. You're really committing to the fiancé act, huh? Vivian leaned in, her lips brushing against Nora's ear. You're not acting. And just like that, the air changed again. Inside the venue, it was all glass, gold, and glamour. Photographers flashed. Guests whispered. Powerful people circled like planets in orbit. And everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Vivian was magnetic, lethal in her elegance. And Nora had never felt so simultaneously seen and scrutinized. Smile, Vivian murmured through her teeth as they passed a wall of cameras. Like, you just remembered how much you love me. Nora forced a smile and whispered back. You're lucky I didn't trip over this dress and take us both down. Vivian smirked. That's love. Baby. Inside, the ballroom glowed under chandeliers like frozen fire. Waiters floated by with champagne. A jazz quartet played in the corner. Vivian greeted people effortlessly. Firm handshakes, sharp nods, charming half-laughs. Nora stayed by her side, smiling, nodding, pretending. But every time Vivian's hand grazed her lower back, every time her fingers curled around Nora's waist in that perfectly possessive way, Nora's heart beat a little faster. It was dangerous how much she liked it. Then he appeared. Damien, her ex, uninvited, unwelcome, and now standing 3 feet away with a champagne flute and a smirk. "Small world," he said, eyes on her voice loud enough to carry. Vivian turned sharply. Nora stiffened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Networking," he said with a shrug. "Didn't realize I'd be bumping into the happy couple." His gaze slid to Vivian, assessing. "I guess I underestimated your taste." Nora opened her mouth, but Vivian was already stepping forward. "And I guess I overestimated your intelligence." Her tone was ice. "Leave now." Damien held up his hands, grinning. "Hey, no need to get territorial. I was just saying hi to an old friend." Vivian's voice dropped. "You're seconds away from being escorted out by security. Test me." Damien hesitated, then backed off, muttering something Nora didn't catch. When he disappeared into the crowd, Vivian turned to her, jaw tight. "Are you okay?" Nora nodded slowly. "I didn't think he'd be here." Vivian stared after him for a long moment. "If he comes near you again, he's done. You can't control everyone. Watch me." Nora touched her arm gently. "Hey, I'm fine." Vivian looked at her, something raw flickering in her eyes. "I didn't like the way he looked at you." "Jealousy," Nora teased, trying to lighten the moment. "No," Vivian said. "Possessiveness." Nora blinked. "That's worse." "I know." They stared at each other too long, too openly. Then Vivian said, "Dance with me." "What now?" "Before I lose my mind." Vivian led her onto the dance floor without waiting for reply. The band shifted into a slow, smoky tune, and Vivian pulled Nora close, one hand at her waist, the other sliding into hers. "You don't dance," Nora whispered. "You don't lie very well. And yet here we are." They moved together slowly, surrounded by other couples, but somehow completely alone. Vivian's body was warm, her touch steady, and Nora hated how natural it felt. How easy it was to lean in. "Are we still pretending?" Nora asked softly. Vivian's breath ghosted against her cheek. "I don't remember anymore." Nora's heart was pounding. Her hands tightened around Vivian's. "This is getting dangerous." It already was. Vivian looked at her then. Really looked like she was memorizing every line of Nora's face. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. "Tell me to pull back." Nora opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "I can't," she breathed. Then Vivian kissed her. Right there on the dance floor, beneath the chandeliers, in front of half of Easton City. Vivian kissed her like she'd been waiting her whole life. Nora kissed back like she was falling fast, hard, without a parachute. When they finally broke apart, the room had gone quiet. Nora didn't care. Not anymore. She turned to Vivian and said, loud enough for anyone who needed to hear, "You're mine, too." She didn't sleep that night. Not from panic this time, but because the moment kept replaying. That kiss under the lights. Vivian's mouth on hers. The single tremor in Vivian's hand against Nora's back. The way the world held its breath. The silence after hadn't been awkward. It felt reverent. And when Nora had whispered, "You're mine, too," she'd meant it. God help her, she'd meant every word. By dawn, sunlight knifed through the penthouse glass. Barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in one of Vivian's oversized button-downs. Nora cradled a mug and watched her phone explode, followers surging, mentions stacking, headlines multiplying. Billionaire CEO kisses fiancé at gala. Confirmation or performance? Who is Nora Quinn, the woman behind Vivian Cross's heart? She set the phone down, stomach flipping. This wasn't her world. She'd said that from the start. But now she was in it neck deep and the water was rising. Footsteps. Vivian entered like a shadow, quiet, composed, devastating. Damp hair, flawless suit, unreadable face. She didn't ask. She lifted her phone. "We're everywhere." "I saw," Nora said. Vivian placed the phone on the counter and crossed to the windows, looking out over the skyline. "The board is thrilled." Stock popped. "PR is calling it the most humanizing moment of my career." "You kissed me like it was a press release," Nora snapped. "That's not what I said," Vivian shot back. "It's what it sounds like." "I kissed you because I wanted to," Vivian said evenly. "But now it's out there, and we have to control it." Nora folded her arms. "You kissed me in front of everyone. You didn't ask. You didn't check in. You just decided. I don't ask permission to protect what's mine. I'm not yours." Vivian blinked, stunned. Not angry, not smug, just stunned. Nora's voice gentled. "I know this started as a lie. I agreed to the role. I knew what I was walking into. But that kiss," she shook her head, "that wasn't in the script. It wasn't scripted for me either." Vivian's voice was quiet now, vulnerable. "Then why do I feel like a pawn in a game?" "I don't understand," Nora asked. "Why does everything you do feel like a move on a chessboard?" "Because that's how I survive," Vivian said, stepping closer. "That's how I've built everything I have. Control, strategy, power. Without it, I lose everything." Nora looked up at her. "And me?" "You are supposed to be a distraction," Vivian whispered. "But you've become the only thing I can't control." The words landed between them like a confession. Nora's chest tightened. "Then maybe it's time to stop trying." Vivian exhaled shakily, like she hated how right that sounded, but she didn't respond. Instead, her phone buzzed again. She checked it, her expression darkening. "What is it?" Nora asked. "You're getting interview requests. Fin in Vogue, Vanity Fair." "Me?" "They want your story. How we met. How I proposed. They want us." Nora blinked. "I can't do that. I'm not built for this." "Then we say, no. I'll handle it. Like you handled everything else." "Like the kiss." Vivian's jaw tensed. "Nora, I just need space." Nora said, "A minute to breathe, to think." Vivian looked like she wanted to argue, but then slowly she nodded. "Okay." Nora walked past her, out of the kitchen, out of the penthouse. She didn't take a driver. She walked. The streets were loud, chaotic, full of life that didn't care about billionaires or fake engagements or kisses. That weren't supposed to mean anything, but somehow meant everything. She found herself in a Ravenhill Park, sitting on a bench surrounded by strangers. She watched couples walk by, real ones, laughing, touching, arguing. She felt hollow and full and confused. Her phone buzzed. It was a message not from Vivian, from Sloane. Vivian canceled her meetings for the day. She's not herself. Nora stared at the screen, fingers trembling. She should have felt victorious, like she'd finally gotten under Vivian's skin. But instead, it made her ache because for the first time, the woman who controlled everything had lost control over her. And Nora wasn't sure what to do with that power. Not yet. Nora stood in front of the penthouse door, staring at the sleek black surface like it might swallow her whole. Her hand hovered over the panel, hesitating, trembling. She hadn't planned to come back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But after hours of walking, after scrolling through 1,000 versions of herself on social media, after sitting in silence with her own thoughts screaming inside her chest, she had realized something both terrifying and inevitable. She missed her. Not the headlines, not the silk sheets or designer gowns or the fake life they'd built. Just her, Vivian, the woman who kissed her like she meant it. The woman who for one breathless second looked like she would fall apart if Nora stepped away. She pressed the intercom. No response. She tried again. Nothing. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Then she tried the code Vivian had entered so many times. 0905. The door clicked open. Nora stepped inside slowly, unsure of what she expected. The penthouse was dark. Not empty, just dim, quiet, like the silence after a storm. She heard the faint clink of glass, followed it, found Vivian barefoot in the living room, still in the black blouse from earlier, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled loose like she'd run her hands through it too many times. She sat on the floor, not the couch, a tumbler of whiskey in her hand, a full bottle beside her. Nora froze. Vivian looked up. No mask, no armor, just eyes red-rimmed, face bare, mouth parted like she'd been holding back something too big to contain. "I didn't think you'd come back," Vivian said softly. "I almost didn't." Nora crossed the room slowly, her heels clicking against a marble, sharp in the quiet. "But I couldn't stop thinking about the way you looked at me when I walked out, like you'd already lost me." Vivian let out a hollow laugh. "That's because I had." Nora sat down across from her, closed but not touching. "You canceled your meetings. I couldn't think straight." "That's not like you." "No," Vivian agreed, looking down into her glass. "It's not." Nora tilted her head. "Why me?" Vivian met her eyes, and for the first time since they met, she looked young, not polished, not powerful, just a woman unraveling. "Because you don't need me. You challenge me. You make me forget who I'm supposed to be. And for once, I wanted something I couldn't buy or control or predict." Nora's throat tightened. "You don't let people see this side of you because if they do, they'll know I'm human and I don't know how to survive like that." Nora reached out slowly and took the glass from her hand, set it aside. Then, without speaking, she shifted forward and wrapped her arms around Vivian. Not seductively, not with an agenda, just held her. Vivian froze at first, then melted. Her arms came around Nora's waist like she'd been waiting years to do it. Her head dropped to her shoulder, and for a long time, they stayed like that, entangled on the cold marble floor, breathing in sync, holding on like the world might tear them apart if they let go. "I thought I was protecting you," Vivian whispered. "But I think I was protecting myself." "From what?" Nora asked. "From wanting you too much." Nora closed her eyes. "It's too late for that." Vivian pulled back just enough to look at her. "Is it?" "Yes," Nora said, voice steady. "Because I'm not leaving again. Not tonight." Vivian's hands tightened on her back. "Say that again." Nora leaned in, forehead pressed against hers. "I'm not leaving. Even if this isn't just a lie anymore, especially because it's not." Vivian kissed her again, but this time it wasn't wild or public or strategic. It was slow, tender, desperate in its honesty. Nora kissed her back like she was anchoring herself to something real for the first time in months. They didn't make love that night. They didn't need to. The intimacy came in whispers. In the way Vivian held Nora's hand when they finally moved to the bed. In the way Nora curled into her side like she belonged there. In the way silence didn't feel empty between them anymore. Before falling asleep, Vivian murmured into her hair, "This is going to get harder. I know people will want more proof. Let them watch." Nora whispered, "I'm not afraid of being yours." Vivian kissed her temple. "And I'm terrified of being yours." But she held her tighter anyway. The morning after felt different, not because of the sunlight flooding into the penthouse, or the quiet warmth of the sheets, or even the way Nora woke up with her head resting on Vivian's shoulder. Her body curved perfectly against the woman she'd once thought of as untouchable. It felt different because for the first time, it wasn't a performance. There were no board members to impress, no cameras, no carefully curated appearances. Just Vivian, still half asleep, arm draped possessively around her waist, face softened in the glow of something real. Nora watched her for a moment, feeling a strange kind of peace settle in her chest. But peace never lasted long in Vivian Cross's world, not even for a morning. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then relentlessly. Vivian groaned and reached for it, her brows furrowed. "What is it?" Nora asked. Vivian sat up slowly, scrolling. "We're trending again." Nora rubbed her eyes. "What now?" Vivian didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed Nora the phone. On the screen was a headline: Vivian Cross and fiancé to give first public interview tonight. Nora blinked. I didn't agree to that. Vivian stood, already heading toward the closet. I was going to tell you this morning. PR thinks it's the perfect time to shift the narrative, reinforce the engagement, address the kiss, humanize me further. Nora's heart began to pound. You scheduled a live interview. Pre-recorded. Controlled. No surprises. And when were you going to ask me? Vivian paused mid-step. I wasn't. Wow. Nora got out of bed slowly, anger bubbling. You really don't know how to stop doing this, do you? Doing what? Making decisions for both of us like I'm some puppet in your empire. Vivian turned, eyes sharp. I'm protecting us. No, you're protecting yourself, your image, your company, your narrative. You didn't even ask me how I felt about going on camera telling the world our story, because I knew you'd say no. Exactly. And you still did it anyway. The room crackled with tension. Vivian stepped closer. Nora, this is how things work. If we want to survive this, we have to control the narrative. If we disappear now, they'll assume it was a stunt. The damage to my name. To your name, Nora interrupted. Not to us, because clearly this has always been about you. That landed like a slap. Vivian froze. Nora grabbed her clothes from the chair, dressing quickly. Cancel the interview. I can't. Then I won't show. Nora. Vivian's voice softened, but her control was fraying. Please. Nora looked at her, truly looked at the woman she'd kissed in front of the world. The woman who had held her like she meant it. The woman who made her feel like more than just collateral. I'm not a pawn, Vivian, and if you keep treating me like one, you'll lose me. Not the fake fiancé. Me. She walked out again. This time it hurt more. Hours passed. Vivian didn't call. Nora didn't expect her to. She knew Vivian well enough now to understand that silence was her shield. Her way of keeping the world out until she could reassert control. But something about this silence felt heavier, more dangerous. She paced in her tiny apartment, phone in hand, heart in her throat. Then it buzzed. A single message from Sloan. She went ahead with the interview alone. Nora turned on the TV just in time to see Vivian sitting across from a primly dressed journalist. Cameras rolling, lights glowing, and for the first time, Vivian looked wrong, distant, cold, like she was performing again. Miss Cross, the journalist said, there's been much speculation about your engagement. Some have called it calculated, others romantic. What do you say to those who question the legitimacy of your relationship? Vivian didn't flinch. I say they don't know what they're talking about. And your fiancé? Nora is unlike anyone I've ever known. She grounds me, challenges me, makes me feel. She hesitated just for a second. Alive. Then where is she tonight? Vivian's jaw tightened. She needed space. Space or distance. It's not your business. Nora's heart twisted. The anchor smiled politely. You understand the optics, of course. A sudden engagement, a high-profile kiss, and now separation. Some people think it was all a publicity stunt. Vivian looked directly into the camera. Then those people don't understand what it means to fall in love when you least expect it, and how terrifying it is to want someone who sees past everything you've built to protect yourself. Nora's breath caught. So, is it real? The anchor asked. A long pause. Vivian's eyes flickered with something raw, unpolished. Yes, to real. Nora's phone slipped from her fingers. She barely heard it hit the floor. Nora didn't realize she was crying until the tears hit the collar of her shirt. She sat on the floor of her apartment, knees pulled to her chest, heart pounding in her ears. Vivian's words kept looping in Nora's head. If people couldn't grasp what it is to be blindsided by love, and how terrifying it is to be wanted by someone who sees past all your armor, then they didn't understand at all. She hadn't said it for show. Not really. Nora had watched Vivian perform enough to know the difference between polish and blood. That interview was a confession, messy, imperfect, true. And Nora had walked away because she was scared, because feeling something that deep, that fast, that completely felt like a risk she wasn't ready to take. The truth was, she already had. She was in love with Vivian Cross, and no gap, no silence, no self-protection could undo it. She stood up so fast her chair scraped, grabbed her keys, and ran. No call, no text. She needed to look Vivian in the eye and say everything she should have said hours, maybe days ago. The penthouse door swung open before she could knock. Sloane stared, surprised. I know, Nora said. Let me in. Sloane stepped aside. Nora crossed the dim foyer, heart pounding. Vivian stood at the window in the same black suit from the interview, arms folded, back turned. You saw it, she said. I did. I didn't plan to say all that. I know. Silence stretched, thin and brittle. You were right, Nora said at last. About what? That falling in love is terrifying. Vivian turned slowly. Her eyes looked tired. Her face gave nothing away. Are you saying you're in love with me? Nora stepped closer. I'm saying I never stood a chance. Vivian's lashes fluttered like the words had landed hard. I tried to control everything, she whispered. You, the narrative, the fallout. The one thing I couldn't control was how I felt every time you looked at me. Like I was more than power in a suit. Nora's mouth tipped, eyes burning. You are more. You're the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't disposable. You're not. Then stop treating me like a risk to be managed and start treating me like a woman choosing you over everything. Vivian moved before Nora could inhale. They collided like magnets yanked too close. Vivian's mouth found hers, nothing delicate about it. All need and hunger, and Nora yielded, clutching at her jacket as Vivian's fingers slid into her hair like she might die if she let go. The kiss deepened promise, plea, apology in one breathless rush. When they finally drew apart, foreheads touching, Nora whispered, "Don't ever do that without me again. I won't. No more interviews. No more choices without me." You're right. Vivian's hands framed her face, thumbs sweeping Nora's cheeks. Tell me you're staying. I'm staying tonight. A beat. Every night. If you want me. Vivian kissed her again. Slower this time, like sealing a contract inked in skin and breath. After that, words weren't necessary. The conversation moved to touch, silk sheets, quiet laughter. The way Vivian held her like letting go wasn't an option. It wasn't theater. It wasn't strategy. It was real. In the gray hours before dawn, Nora lay with her ear to Vivian's heartbeat and finally said it aloud. I love you. Vivian stilled for a second, then pressed a kiss to the crown of Nora's head. I think I loved you the night you lied in that bar. Nora laughed against her skin. It was a terrible lie. No, Vivian murmured. It was the start of the only truth that mattered. Morning should have been calm, and for a few rare hours, it was. Nora woke up tangled in Vivian's arms, her body warm against silk sheets, her breath slow and steady against Nora's neck. There was no need to speak. They lay there in silence, the kind that felt like understanding, like two hearts finally beating in rhythm. Vivian's hand drifted lazily over Nora's back, fingertips tracing invisible circles as if memorizing her. Nora thought, this is real. This is ours. Until the knock. Loud, repetitive, urgent. Vivian was up in seconds, her body tense, expression hardening before Nora had even processed what was happening. She threw on a robe and went to the door. Sloane stood there, face pale, phone in hand. You need to see this. Vivian took the phone and stared, her jaw clenched. Nora sat up in bed, the sheets clutched around her. What is it? Vivian didn't answer. She turned the phone so Nora could see. It was a news alert, a photo. Nora Quinn, ex of tech mogul Damian Knox, allegedly rebounds with billionaire CEO Vivian Cross in calculated movie. The image was old. Nora and Damian at some tech party years ago, laughing. But below it, the article was venomous. Accusations of Nora being a social climber, an opportunist, someone who had manipulated the story of a fake engagement into a real power grab. Who released this? Nora asked, heart pounding. Sloane hesitated. Damien. Of course he did, Vivian muttered. He's calling in every favor he's got. And it gets worse, Sloane said, pulling up another article. This one had a photo taken from across the street of Nora and Vivian inside the penthouse kissing. It was blurry, invasive, taken without consent. The headline read, "More than business. Vivian Cross's fiancé caught an intimate moment. Real or PR strategy?" Nora's stomach dropped. Someone's watching us. We'll increase security, Vivian said immediately. I'll sue every media outlet that shared it. I'll bury them. That's not the point, Nora snapped, voice shaking. They're attacking my life, my past, my integrity. They're attacking us, Vivian corrected, because they can't stand seeing someone like me fall for someone like you. What does that mean? It means you're not who they expected. You're not wealthy, not powerful. You don't fit the narrative. I never asked to be part of a narrative, Nora said, standing now. All I did was lie to get away from my ex, and now I'm the center of a damn media war. And I'm going to protect you by controlling everything again. Vivian's eyes flickered. By making sure they don't destroy you. You mean making sure they don't destroy you? The words came out sharper than Nora intended. Vivian flinched. Silence fell. Sloane cleared her throat and slipped away, leaving them alone. I didn't mean, Nora began. Yes, you did, Vivian said quietly. And maybe you're right, Nora sighed. This is just a lot. I love you. But this constant exposure, this pressure to perform every second of the day, it's exhausting. Vivian stepped closer, her voice low. Then let's leave just for a few days. We'll disappear somewhere private. No phones. No headlines, just us. Nora looked at her, searching her face. You do that. Walk away from everything for a little while. I'd burn it all down for you, Chisel said. And Nora knew in her gut. She meant it. They left that night. A private jet, a villa in the south of France. The world couldn't follow them there. No paparazzi, no phone calls, just crashing waves, warm sunsets, and each other. For 2 days, they were free. They swam at midnight, made love with the windows open, laughed until their stomachs hurt. Vivian cooked badly. Nora teased her mercilessly. They danced barefoot on the terrace. And for a moment, the illusion of safety was enough. But reality has sharp claws. On the third morning, Vivian stepped out onto the balcony to take a call she thought was private. Nora stayed inside, curled on the couch with coffee, until she heard a name that made her freeze. Sabrina, Vivian's voice low. You weren't supposed to reach out. Not now. A pause, then sharper. Don't threaten me. This has nothing to do with you anymore. Silence. Then she doesn't know and she doesn't need to. Nora stood, heart in her throat. Vivian ended the call and turned to find Nora in the doorway. Who's Sabrina? Nora asked. Vivian stiffened. No one you need to worry about. That's not your call. It's from before you. A mistake. One that's clearly not finished. It is, Vivian insisted. She's trying to stir things up. Jealous, vengeful. She knows exactly when to strike. And what exactly doesn't she want me to know? Vivian looked away. There were complications. We were together on and off. She didn't like being left, especially not for someone like you. Someone like me, Nora repeated, voice hollow. You mean someone who didn't grow up in mansions or fly private before breakfast? No, I mean someone real. Then why lie about her? Why hide it? Vivian's voice cracked. Because I knew you'd look at me differently. Nora took a step back. And you were right. Nora stood on the stone balcony, ocean wind tugging at her dress. But all she could feel was heat, fury, betrayal. Heartbreak colliding in her chest like a car crash in slow motion. Vivian stayed still by the sliding glass doors, arms folded, eyes unreadable for once. And Nora hated that. Hated that the woman she'd finally let in, finally trusted, was shutting her out again, with the same cold silence that once made her irresistible, and now made her unbearable. "You lied to me," Nora said, voice shaking. "By omission, by silence, by every time you looked at me and told me I was the only one. While Sabrina was still somewhere in your shadows." "She's not in my life anymore," Vivian replied, controlled but softer than usual. "But she's still a part of your past. A part you tried to erase like it wouldn't matter. But it does because I'm here now. And if you want to keep me, you don't get to pick which parts of yourself I get to see." Vivian stepped closer, her voice trembling beneath the surface. "I was afraid of what? Of you looking at me like you are now, like you're ready to walk away." Nora didn't answer. She turned her back to the ocean, facing Vivian head on. "Then why give her that power? Why let her be the one to ruin what we have instead of trusting me with the truth?" "Because I don't know how to do this," Vivian said, her voice cracking. "I know how to run companies, close billion-dollar deals, manipulate headlines. But this," she gestured between them, "this is not something I've ever known how to protect." "You protect your image," Nora said bitterly. "You protect your power. But when it comes to me, you hide." "I was hiding from myself," Vivian said, "and I didn't realize how much until you looked at me and made me feel like I was enough. Not as the CEO, not as the billionaire, but as a woman who has no clue what to do when someone loves her without agenda." Nora stared at her for a moment. The pain in her chest cracked open to make room for something else. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. "So, what was Sabrina to you?" she asked more gently now. Vivian closed her eyes, inhaled slowly. "She was comfortable, calculated. We fit on paper. To powerful women. Both ruthless, both careful. But it wasn't love. Not really. It was proximity and control. She hated when I started pulling away. And when she found out about you, she knew exactly where to hit me. My reputation, my fear, my guilt. And instead of telling me, you tried to manage it all behind the scenes. I thought I could contain it. You can't contain everything, Vivian." Nora stepped closer now, her voice low, raw. "Especially not me." Vivian's shoulders dropped slightly, like those words hit something deep and real inside her. "I know, and I'm sorry. Do you want me to leave?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Vivian's eyes snapped to hers, panic flickering before she could hide it. "No." "Then give me the truth. All of it. From now on, no more PR moves. No more protection through control. Just you and me or nothing at all." Vivian stepped forward slowly like approaching a wild animal. "You are the only thing in my life. I don't want to cure it. You're messy and brilliant and infuriating and real. I want that. I want you. I'll give you everything. Nora, just don't walk away." Nora searched her face, trying to hear what lived between the words performance or truth. There was no mask left, no walls. Just Vivian, the woman who'd once staged a lie and was now asking to live the truth. "Okay," Nora said at last, "but if you shut me out again, I won't come back. I believe you." "Good." Vivian drew her in, not frantic, not ravenous, but steady, present, sure. The kiss was slow, deep, threaded with relief. When they parted, Vivian whispered, "Do you still want forever with me?" "Only if I get to be the one who proposes this time," Nora murmured against her mouth. Vivian laughed actually laughed raw and startled and so human it nearly cracked Nora open. "All over again. Deal." They'd just turned to go inside when Vivian's phone buzzed on the table. Nora picked it up without thinking. One stark text glared on the screen. "Interview with Sabrina airing tonight. Unedited." Nora looked up, stomach dropping. "We're not done." Vivian took the phone, jaw tightening. "She's going public." "About you?" "About us." "What now?" Vivian met her eyes, voice steady for the first time since they'd met. "Now we fight back. Together. Nora curled on the couch, knees to her chest, watching the countdown tick across the flat screen. Vivian stood behind her, arms folded, jaw set so hard it might crack. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't cold anymore, it was a held breath, a shared dread. The network logo flashed. Music swelled. Sabrina appeared. Immaculate lighting, soft pastels, blonde waves arranged like innocence. Her expression a careful portrait of wounded grace. "Thank you for having me," Sabrina said, low and bruised. "I didn't want to do this. But the truth matters, especially when people are being misled." The interviewer leaned in, eyes full of purchased concern. "You're referring to Vivian Cross's engagement?" Sabrina dipped her head. "Yes, we were together almost 2 years. When she ended it, it wasn't because she fell in love. It was because she found someone more useful." Nora's heart lurched. "She told me Nora wasn't her type," Sabrina went on. "Said it was temporary, a distraction. That she needed someone soft to make her look softer. It was image, not love." Behind her, Vivian flinched. Nora turned, gaze sharp. "Did you say that?" "No," Vivian answered instantly. "I never said those words to her or anyone. But you thought it," Nora said. Vivian opened her mouth, shut it, then nodded once. "In the beginning, yes. I thought you fit the image. That I could steer the story. That you were the safest choice to round my public edges." Nora's stomach twisted. "And now?" she asked. "Now I know I was wrong," Vivian said, voice low and clear. "You're not the safe option. You're the dangerous one, the one I'd risk everything for." On screen, Sabrina's voice cut through again. "I still love her," she said. "And I think part of her still loves me. She just doesn't know what to do with someone who truly sees her. So, she chose someone easier to manage." Vivian stepped forward, then grabbed the remote and shut off the TV. The room fell into silence again, but this time it pulsed with something electric. Pain, rage, fear. "She's lying," Vivian said, her voice cracking. "She's trying to twist everything because I didn't stay. Because I didn't love her. Not like I love you." Nora stood slowly. "That's what scares me. Because if you chose me for how I looked beside you, how do I know you didn't convince yourself you loved me just because it made sense?" Vivian closed the space between them. "You don't know. You can't. But you can feel it. You can feel how every time I touch you, it's not a performance. You know I would set fire to every inch of my life just to keep you safe. You know I am a mess when you're not around. That I forget how to breathe when you look at me like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm still worth saving." Nora's hands were trembling. Her chest hurt. "I believed you," she whispered. "I still do. But I need more than belief now. I need proof that you choose me because of who I am, not who I'm not." Vivian reached out slowly and cupped her face. "Then let me prove it." And then her mouth was on Nora's. No more controlled, curated kisses. This one was fire and ache and rawness. A kiss that tasted like desperation and redemption all at once. Nora kissed her back with the same fury, the same ache. They stumbled backward until Nora's back hit the wall, Vivian's hand sliding up under her shirt. Their mouths never parting. The clothes came off in pieces, in gasps. They didn't make love like people who were trying to impress. They made love like people trying not to fall apart. Later, tangled in sweat-damp sheets, skin on skin, breath shallow and heavy, Nora whispered, "What happens when the world turns against us?" Vivian kissed her shoulder, her voice low and rough. "Then we stop asking for permission to exist and we fight together." Nora closed her eyes. "I want to believe that." "Then don't believe the world," Vivian murmured. "Believe me." Just then, Vivian's phone buzzed. She reached for it, scanning the message. Her eyes darkened. "What is it?" Nora asked, sitting up. Vivian looked at her. "They're launching an investigation." "Into what?" "Into us. Into the legitimacy of our engagement. Into whether I manipulated stock value through the narrative of our relationship." Nora's blood ran cold. They're trying to destroy your company. No, Vivian said slowly. They're trying to destroy you because if they prove this was all a stunt, you'll be the one they blame for helping me orchestrate it. Nora stared at her, heart pounding. They'll come after me. They already are. Vivian met her gaze, steady and solemn, and I won't let them. But from here on out, we're not just lovers in a lie that became the truth. We're a threat, and that means they're going to come for everything. Nora didn't hesitate. She reached for Vivian's hand and laced their fingers together, then let them. I'm not running anymore. The headlines didn't stop. Neither did the calls, or the cameras, or the vultures. Nora woke up to her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Gold digger, or mastermind. Who really is Nora Quinn? Fake fiancé, real fraud. Did Vivian Cross manipulate markets with a lie? And did Nora help her? The world wasn't just suspicious. It was hostile. The lie they had built together, the one that had accidentally become the truth, was now being dismantled and weaponized. Nora stared at the screen, numb, sitting in the corner of Vivian's office while three lawyers argued in clipped tones. They barely looked at her, as if she wasn't part of the narrative, just a problem to be cleaned up. Vivian sat at the head of the table, arms folded, jaw set like stone. But Nora could see the tremor in her fingers, the darkness under her eyes, the way her walls were cracking under the weight of 1,000 headlines and boardroom threats. They're demanding a public statement. One of the lawyers said, we can control the damage if we sever the personal relationship from the professional fallout. You mean if we lie? Vivian said, voice sharp again. Not a lie, the lawyer replied. A reframing. You announce a mutual decision to end the engagement, admit to emotional turbulence, take responsibility, and isolate the issue from the company. You want me to throw her under the bus? Vivian snapped. You want me to act like she didn't save my life the second she walked into it? Nora stood slowly. Do it. Vivian's head snapped toward her. What? They're right, Nora said. If we keep this going, they'll tear you apart. Your company, your legacy, your name. I don't care about my name, but I care about mine, Nora said, eyes burning. And right now, I'm a walking headline, a liability. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you built. Vivian's voice dropped. You're not. Then let me prove it. Nora turned to the lawyers. Set up the press conference. But I'm going to speak alone. The room exploded. Objections. Legal warnings. PR nightmares. But Nora didn't flinch. She looked at Vivian and said, trust me. And for once, Vivian didn't argue. She nodded. That evening, the conference room was converted into a press platform. Cameras everywhere. Journalists packed in. Nora stood behind the podium in a simple black dress. No jewelry, no makeup, but enough to cover the shadows beneath her eyes. Vivian stood just off stage, arms crossed, gaze locked on her. Nora took a breath. You want to know the truth? She began, voice echoing. Not the curated story. Not the engagement announcement. Not the headlines. The truth is that I lied in a bar to get away from an ex. I panicked and Vivian stepped in. She said, she's mine. And in that moment, something shifted. It was supposed to be a game, but the game ended the second we started looking at each other like we meant it. Flashbulbs, silence, the world watching. We didn't plan this. She continued. We didn't choreograph it. We tried to control it, tried to frame it into something digestible, something corporate. But love doesn't care about brand strategy. It doesn't care about optics or quarterly reports. It just happens. And when it did, it scared the hell out of us. Vivian's eyes were glassy. The entire room was still. If you want to blame someone, blame me, Nora said, for walking into a lie, for letting it become something real, for loving someone who didn't know if she was allowed to be loved in return. But don't question her integrity. Don't question her heart. She didn't manipulate this. She fell just like I did. The room stayed silent for a full 5 seconds after she stepped down. Vivian met her halfway, grabbed her hand, and kissed it like it was sacred. And in that moment, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about surviving together. But survival, it turned out, wasn't guaranteed because less than an hour later, they returned to the penthouse to find the front door ajar. Security footage wiped. The apartment ransacked. Someone had broken in, not to steal, but to send a message. Nora's photos were shredded. The painting Vivian bought for her slashed and in thick red paint across the mirror. She's not worth it. Nora's breath caught. Vivian stood frozen. And suddenly, this wasn't about press conferences or scandals. This was war. Vivian reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police." Nora stopped her. "No, not yet. Nora, this isn't just about us anymore," she said, voice shaking. "This is personal. Someone is trying to scare us into breaking. We don't run." "What are you suggesting?" Vivian asked. Nora looked her in the eye. "We expose them first." Vivian blinked. "Sabrina or Damien, or someone else who wants to see us burn. We stop reacting. We go on the offensive. That's dangerous. So is loving you," Nora whispered. "And I'm doing it anyway." Vivian stepped forward and kissed her like the world was ending. Because it might be. But not before they fought back. They didn't sleep that night. The broken glass, the slashed canvas, the message painted in red, "She's not worth it," echoed like a scream through every corner of the penthouse. Nora paced the living room barefoot while Vivian made calls, her voice cold and sharp, commanding a private security team to triple their coverage. But neither of them felt safe. Not really, because this wasn't about money or headlines anymore. This was a message, a threat, an escalation. "It's Sabrina," Nora said for the third time, tension in her voice. "Or Damien. We can't assume," Vivian replied, still scrolling through emails, surveillance logs, financial leaks. "Then we stop assuming and start proving," Nora said, crossing her arms. "We have to think like them." "What do they want?" "Destruction," Vivian answered without hesitation. "Of me, of us. And who loses the most if we win?" Vivian paused. And then slowly something clicked. "Damien," she said. "He still holds shares in the startup he sold to Langford Global. If the stock tanks, he gets leverage back. And Sabrina, she's personal," Nora muttered. "She wants to ruin you. But she's using me to do it." Vivian stared at her, something dark flickering in her eyes. "Then we give them exactly what they don't want." "What's that?" "US still standing, still loving, still loud." They made a plan. Vivian's tech team pulled metadata from the threatening message painted on the wall, hidden code embedded in the file from the security camera footage Sabrina had leaked to the media weeks earlier. Coordinates, a name, a signal. Not Sabrina's, Damien. His fingerprints were on the money trail. He'd paid for the article placements, the backdoor hacks, even the fake social media accounts flooding the feeds with hate. Sabrina had been the face, but Damien had been the machine. Nora stared at the screen in disbelief. "He wanted to ruin me for walking away, and he wanted to ruin me for not needing him," Vivian said, her voice low, "for being more powerful without him than with him." The next day, they went public together. A press conference. This time, no lawyers, no PR firm, just Nora and Vivian in front of the cameras. Not performative, not polished, just real. "We lied at the start," Vivian said into the microphone, "but we fell in love by accident, and we stayed in love by choice." Nora stood beside her, hand in hers. This wasn't a brand strategy. This wasn't a scam. This was the messiest, most terrifying, most beautiful truth I've ever known. And I will not apologize for loving this woman. A wave of applause started. Hesitant, but real. Vivian's voice sharpened. "We also have evidence of the coordinated attacks, the false headlines, the paid smear campaigns, and will be pursuing legal action." She handed a folder to a stunned journalist in the front row. You wanted a story. Here's the real one. That night, Damian Knox was arrested for fraud, corporate sabotage, and unauthorized surveillance. Sabrina vanished from the media like smoke. And Nora and Vivian, they stayed through the storm, through the aftermath, through the rebuilding. A month later, Nora stood barefoot in Vivian's office, wearing one of her button-downs, hair up, no makeup, scrolling through messages from strangers who now saw her not as a pawn, but as a woman who refused to be broken. Vivian entered quietly behind her. You're still reading comments. Some of them are nice now. And the others? I don't care anymore, Nora said, turning. They don't know me. You do. Vivian walked toward her slow and intentional. And I love what I know. Nora smiled. Say it again. Vivian touched her cheek. I love you. Every version, even the one who lied in a bar just to get away from a man. Nora laughed. You've never thanked me for that, by the way. Thank you for lying. You're welcome, Nora said, grinning. Now do something with that gratitude. Vivian leaned in. Their kiss was soft, familiar, true. Later that night, they sat on the rooftop, legs tangled under a blanket, wine in hand. Easton City stretched out below them, glowing and alive. Nora rested her head on Vivian's shoulder. What now? Vivian looked up at the stars. Now we stop pretending. We stop running. And we live together always. Nora sat up slowly, pulled something from her coat pocket, and placed it in Vivian's hand. A ring, simple gold. No diamonds, just engraved on the inside. You said she's mine. Vivian blinked. You're proposing to me. I told you I would. But we're all ready. Then let's do it right this time, Nora said. No lies. No headlines. Just us. Vivian's eyes brightened. Yes. Nora pulled her close and kissed her deep, certain. When they parted, Vivian breathed against her lips. I don't care what the world thinks. I choose you, again and again. Then we've already won, Nora whispered back. If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel in a special way, tap the thanks button below, the one with the heart and $sign. With super thanks, you can contribute directly and help me keep creating more videos for you.